May the 4th be with you. Star Wars Republic Commando video game review. I'm thinking I'm going to keep this entirely spoiler-free. Certainly if I do at any point get into spoilers, I will warn before I do so. And when I say that, I mean spoilers for this game. I might come with some spoilers for at least some other Star Wars media. You might realize why later. And the game, I believe, is rated T for teen. Certainly this video will be. And, yeah, I kind of love this game. So, oh, did I mention it's from 2005? Yeah. And played it on PC and only in single player. I cannot comment on multiplayer at all. So, basically, this was one of the ones that were very distinctly licensed for promotion of one of the movies, which I suppose, I don't know, maybe I don't even have to say, considering it came out in 2005 when, Revenge of the Sith also did. Basically, you play as the leader of a group of commandos. There's 4 of you total. Republic Commando, so you are clone forces, You are fighting very specific battles that, you're not necessarily partaking in the massive battles that we see in the movies, but yeah, I don't think I have to explain what a commando unit is, but that's what you are. And I suppose, others have already pointed out that this is, they basically have the same personalities as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which, I don't know, just kind of seems to work out for, Star Wars. Like this, they did the same thing with the Bad Batch. It just, I don't know. I have a number of issues with how Disney, and I appreciate that technically this was pre-Disney owning, I believe it was 2012 that Disney started owning Star Wars. So for this next bit, I'm just talking about the Bad Batch, but yeah, I don't think them, using tropes like this is necessarily one of their bad, yeah, I mean, they definitely need to treat their employees better, stand up to Trump more. But that is basically it. And so this has a first-person, core with tactical, elements. And I don't have to tell you that in video games that are not inherently tactical, like RTS and turn-based strategy and that sort of thing, tactical elements, if you don't handle them just right, they can end up drier than the dunes of Tatooine. But this one does a really solid job. Basically, you can very rarely just try to Rambo your way through this. You have to be very aware of what the commandos are doing and what you are doing. Some of the time you are primarily making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. Other times you're having them provide cover while you do something really important. Sometimes it's a bit of a mix. And throughout, I found myself really trying to determine what the best course of action was. It was like being just on the very edge permanently of falling into a rancor. It was just every step of the way really thinking very carefully about what to do next. And the yeah, I think a good place to start is to give an overview of. I think I'll note essentially the one negative thing I have to say about the tactics element is that they have one key for whether you're doing something yourself or if you're telling someone else to. And there were times in the heat of battle where, you know, it's basically if you're very close to something, then holding down F will not pay respects, but it will let you do the thing. But if you're slightly further away and you tap F, that means you tell one of the others to do it. And there is enough of a UI element to make sure, you know, that you're not really unclear on which one you're doing. I don't know. I suppose it's maybe more that you have to get used to it. But basically, there are doors to open, and you can either just passively open them or you can breach if you believe that there's something right on the other side. I will say, personally, I found myself breaching significantly more often than not. And yeah, that's just something to... Anyway, basically, breaching will have one of them... You know, if you tell them to breach, then one of them will make the door burst open, throw a grenade, and then all of them will be ready to fight whatever's on the other side, which obviously gives you the element of surprise on them. And you also, yeah, that is it for that one. Sometimes you have to, I mean, it's essentially hack, but because it's Star Wars, they call it slice, which, yeah, different effects at different times. Then there is the... Actually, I guess this is a good place to briefly pause and note. So, oh, yeah, right. Now I remember. Yeah. There's also planting an explosive, which you detonate with a remote whenever, you know, you can even do it at, you know, an okay distance. It just, you know, all it takes is for you to be looking directly at it, and then the HUD element will come up. You press F, it immediately, you know, or almost immediately triggers. And he'll even say, if, you know, if one of the other soldiers is very close, at least one is very close by, he'll say, get clear, and they will, and then it triggers. All after you pressing F. Now, something that works really well is the fact that this is not instantaneous, which actually, one more thing before I finish that thought, is that this is one of those games where I'm not sure you or your squad, I guess this is a good time to note, I played this on easy. And if you want to make fun of me for that, feel free. That's how I did it. Whatever. So, some of what I say in this video might not be true for the higher difficulty settings. Personally, I felt there was enough of a challenge. I've always appreciated when games deliver a challenge on easy, but make it so that, you know that thing where Lisa Simpson says, a challenge I can do? That's what I wanted, and that's what I got. But this is one of those games where it seems like maybe you can't truly die, nor can the other three that, you know, of the Republic Commandos. Basically, if you get sufficiently wounded, you or another, and this is again, it works the same as the other things I've mentioned, someone, and sometimes one of your compatriots will do it on their own, especially if you're not in the middle of a firefight, which of course a lot of the time is the case. But yeah, you have to, you know, resuscitate them, because it's Star Wars. You all have manual carry-on defibrillators, and that particular one usually doesn't take many seconds. Right, healing is also a thing. You have to heal, and you have to tell your commandos to heal. Be prepared that if you tell a commando to heal, and then tell him to disregard that, he might call you a sadist. In my defense, it was because there was a glitch, and the commando wasn't doing it, and I was trying to see if telling him not to do it and then doing something else might get him to do it, but okay. No, seriously though, the banter is quite fun. They also, another example of banter, just to give you a brief idea of it, is one of them says, oh wow, did you hear, this person thinks I'm great. And then one of the others retorts, someone has to, or that means at least one person does, something along those lines, that chestnut. But yeah, so the healing, resuscitating does not take a huge amount of time. Healing, I love that one actually, uneasy, it doesn't take very long, like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 seconds. Some of these other things can take 10 seconds on average, and sometimes a bit more. But if you're doing one of these in the heat of battle, that means that the person doing it will need cover, whether that's you or one of the other commandos. And that is tremendous fun. I particularly enjoyed the fact that, yeah, there were times where I would at least try to maybe do it myself or send one of the others, and yeah. One of the other great things is, the ones that take more than like 2 seconds maybe, so not resuscitation and not breaching. If you've started the process, there is this countdown, which is both visible when you get the exact number of seconds if you point your cursor directly at the thing, but there is also this sort of meter that fills over the HUD element that shows, what that commando is doing, what their health is, and yeah. That means that you can, by pointing and then, pressing F, you can tell them to stop at any time, which can be extremely, and you yourself can stop at any time, which is extremely useful if you are under heavy fire, which you might be. Did I mention that some of the things you have to blow up are troop deployers, which, yes, if you let them, they will basically spawn an infinite number. Now, at least on easy, I'm going to stop saying that. For everything else I say in this video, please presume I'm talking about easy difficulty. They won't, from one of these, spam that many. I didn't really sit down and count, heat of battle and all that. Listen, I wish I had the nerve of a Mandalorian, but I'm not quite there yet. But it's any one of these transports. Just keep in mind there might be more than one in one spot, but any one of them, it's not like a huge number. I don't know, maybe 3 per, but it can still end up a lot if you but don't just stand there and just try to shoot one by one before making an attempt. You will, at least at times, have to either go or send someone to blow it up. And then, once there's 3 of them, if you're struggling to keep them busy, you may, pull that person back. Other than that, F1 tells them to aggressively pursue the current objective. F2 gets them to move with you, and I loved how much this is literal. Like, if you start to move away from an active battlefield and they're on F2, they will do the same. Like, they might shoot a little bit and make like a tactical retreat, but they're not gonna just stand there and wait and be like, no, I gotta finish this one enemy, which, like, that can be very annoying when that is how it's programmed, And F3 tells them wherever you're pointing is where they're supposed to secure, which also does mean that if there simply aren't enemies there, you can tell them, okay, stay put in that spot, which might sometimes be what makes the most sense. And I think that more or less covers the different orders. If you are the one who is wounded, it's a mission failure, and you'll have to replay something if all of your team are also down. But if there is at least one, you can tell them maintain current orders, disregard the most recently given orders, and come and resuscitate me. And there's also an option for just loading, Loading has, what was it, like, I think it was almost a dozen. I think it was like 10 slots for like manual. Then there's one for quick saves, F5 and F9 for saving and loading, and one for the checkpoint save, which I don't think I have to tell you, that one takes care of itself. I don't know. Any younglings watching? Hopefully not. I don't think this is quite appropriate for your age. And basically, I would be remiss if I did not say that there were times where I had fun just like, telling them, giving them orders, and then running into the fray and meleeing certain tough enemies. You can't necessarily do it with all. Just briefly, just to distract them away from you, because you do fight the super battle droid, the, big, well, let's see, I guess it's all relative. The one you first see near the very, very end of Attack of the Clones, the badass one that is then rendered, no threat in Revenge of the Sith for some, to me, unfathomable reasons. Like, I don't know, reasons best known to George Lucas and the spirits of Jedi of the past. Now, right. Also, your commandos have completely infinite ammo and the same basic weapons as you. So the thing is, you cannot have them throwing grenades or using a sniper rifle at just any time. You need specific emplacements for that. And once you have them in those, then that is infinite grenades, infinite sniper fire in the area that they can hit from there. And the grenades are indeed thrown. So it is, of course, somewhat limited, but very effective. And there are times where you are not sending any of them to one of these emplacements. Sometimes you're sending all of them. Sometimes it's somewhere in between. You cannot take up one of them yourself, except for the ones that are actual gun emplacements, which, keep in mind, can also be utilized by the enemy. So if you or one of yours is trying to make their way to an empty one, just beware, keep a close eye, because an enemy might take over it, and then you have to take that enemy out while they are in this gun emplacement, some of which have at least some degree of armor. That means that you can't just immediately, one shot whoever's in there. But yeah, I really appreciated that I've always been a big fan of when FPSs enable you to do this, and some of them, it's like powerful blaster fire, some it's like explosives, and I think that more or less covers the basic features. Right. Other than that, you can also tell... Right. Did I mention F2 also means if you shoot an enemy, so will your commandos. Now, that also means that they will stop, I think, immediately when you stop shooting. If you want them to do continued fire, maybe even on someone that you're not shooting, point to the enemy. When the reticle turns red, press F to get them to target. Now, all of this is well and good. I enjoyed it a lot. Others have already pointed out it is reminiscent of one of the can't believe I'm blanking on that author's name. Tom Clancy. I want to say it's Rainbow Six, but I have not played that game in like 30 years. 25, I guess. I cannot remember it anymore. But yeah, this thing of giving orders and such. And I really appreciate, I think they did an almost perfect job of keeping it streamlined, because like, I guess I've pretty much painted the picture. There's a lot of different things you can tell them to do. And if this game had been made like 8 years earlier, there would have been a different key for each of these orders, and it would have been ridiculous. Or it might have been like a drop-down menu for no real reason, because at the end of the day, there's not that many. It's all context sensitive, you know? You can always tell what you're about to have them do. However, there is a screen shaking effect, which I found to be quite frustrating, primarily because it screws up both your aim and your order giving, because it will just very suddenly... See, I wish that the reticule did not move during those, or maybe that it only happened in between battles, but in the middle of a battle it can get annoying. There were times where it happened like maybe half a dozen times within a few minutes, and that's, yeah, no good. But it is not some huge problem. I did see at least one person say there was like patch stuff for this. I will admit I did not look very deeply into that. Like essentially the one thing I noticed that bothered me was that the menu is not really optimized for the way a mouse behaves today. So even if you set it to the lowest sensitivity, it will still go all over the place. Like, honestly, not unlike, you know, a scared pit droid or something, just all over them. And I considered getting a patch, but I just didn't feel like bothering with it. And I found that you can genuinely just use the arrow keys to maneuver all of the menus, and it's not a problem. I forget if I had to adjust it for the in-game, but certainly for the in-game, once I adjusted it, if I did, it worked, you know, without any problems, which is not always the case with, like, for sure, if that had not been the case, I would have dealt with a patch. I guess I should briefly note, the reason I did not mess with a patch, a big part of it is my wrists are still sore and were especially bad when I first started playing this, so yeah. Now, I feel like that pretty much covers the features. Did I mention that the game healing is essentially infinite? It's just that you can't take it with you. There are these specific spots, and something I quite appreciate is sometimes, while sometimes there's only one, which can get a little annoying if all 4 of you need healing, sometimes there's like 3, so you can literally send all 3 of your commandos to heal at the same time, and once the first one is done, you heal there yourself. And yeah, I also really appreciated that the commandos respond, like they, you know, they'll say yes if they can, but yeah, there are types, like, yeah, a non-zero number of occasions, I was a little absent-minded, didn't realize that they didn't need healing, so I told them, you know, go heal, back to now, as he says, and yes, it is indeed Tamara Morrison, awesome. And the, for at least one of them, I think, maybe some of them are, wait, I might be thinking of something. Yeah, I don't have to list the cast. It's great. You can see, you know, you might recognize a name or two, but it's easy to find. Anyway, the, yeah, let's see. Okay, I'll just very briefly, yeah, Roger L. Jackson does indeed make an appearance awesomely. Anyway, yeah, the, yeah, you know, if you tell them back to now, they will just say, none of us need it right now. You know, instead of just like not saying anything, which like I don't know, I find it a little annoying in games where you're trying to get your AI partner to do something and they just don't respond at all. Now, when it comes to Star Wars games, I have had at least some fun with each of the ones that I've played. You know, I guess I'll just very briefly note, other than this, yeah, but there is definitely a range between them. You know, yeah, some of them hit the mark like a bounty hunter with a sniper rifle, but others, so I'll just very briefly note. I think I'll start with some of my favorites are this one, just it's probably clear by now, but other than that, you know, I'm quite fond of the Kyle Katarn ones, which I never know what to call except the Kyle Katarn ones. The Dark Forces / Jedi Knight / Jedi Academy ones. Other than that, I had fun playing Super Star Wars. And I've played the Lego Star Wars that is called the... You know, what was the... Okay. It has a title that makes it sound like it's everything Star Wars, but confusingly, it is episodes 1 through 6. It does not have anything past that, which, fair enough. I don't even know if they knew that they were making more when they put it out. You know, it's not really a problem, and I knew, you know, I saw in the blurb that it's just that originally they apparently released episodes 1 through 3 and episodes 4 through 6 separately from each other. You know, that's all. Yeah, I enjoyed parts of that. By the way, reviews forthcoming for the ones I haven't already done reviews on. Just, it might be a while. I am considering doing just one per year of Star Wars games. I don't think I have to tell you exactly what time of year it'll probably be. Other than that, you know, I own some that I don't want to promise them. I'll just say that there are others that I intend to at least try and see if, you know, but yeah, I'm not naming names right now. But other than that, I have indeed played the Force Awakens game. Wow, I may need to reconsider recording anything this early in the morning, this soon after I get out of bed. I am, of course, talking about the Phantom Menace game. I don't even know if there is one for Force Awakens. And you know, I had fun with that one, but I am willing to admit, like, there are a number of aspects of that. Some would argue the majority of them that are just pure bantha dung. And I will admit, when I first heard that this was essentially one long escort mission, at least like hypothetically, because, you know, you tend to spend this with at least one of the other three, and I would definitely say it is at its strongest when there is at least one other, but ultimately I don't think that it spends too long with you entirely on your own for that to be a problem. I would definitely say, you know, when you are just on your own, like, it's not as enjoyable to play like that as something like Half-Life 1. And I hear Half-Life 2, that one I am expecting to be able to do a video on. It just might... I mean, right now it's looking like months at least. I guess maybe more. You know, just, like, don't hold your breath. For, you know, you'll turn blue. But, you know, like Cad Bane or something. But you will, you know, I do intend to get to it. And it is not as far away in my schedule as some other things. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, so yeah, since you are, you know, like, it's not a great idea to just let the 3 commandos just do whatever. You know, don't run on autopilot. You will run into trouble. They are not the best at gauging how much they can handle, which, fair enough, they're probably expecting you to, you know, put in a lot of effort, you know, and they're, yeah, what can I say? Good soldiers follow orders, you know? But I was indeed very relieved. This is not anything like one of those absolutely horrid escort mission kind of deals that we used to be, like, yeah, it used to, like, I've known people who loved video games and played them all the time who would rage quit very shortly into escort missions, and I don't blame them, because some of them are just terrible. The escort missions, not the players. But here, part of it is how responsive they are. Like, no offense, but, you know, if your commandos are constantly being overwhelmed, there's some chance that you are playing it a little too aggressively. You know, you are not an overwhelming force. There's 4 of you, and the number of enemies greatly exceeds that. This is also one of those where, and this is not really a criticism, it's just a neutral description, there are times where you might be fighting the same enemies for several minutes before you realize whether or not you're supposed to keep fighting them, whether there's a finite amount, or if you're supposed to do something else that, you know, and they are going to keep spawning until you accomplish that thing, you know. A lot of the time the game tells you this. And I thought they did a good job of finding a balance between hand-holding and, like, you know, letting you, yeah. Like, it's a very delicate balance. And this one does not go over the edge into the Sarlacc pit, so that's very nice. And the tutorial was not, like, overlong either. And it helps that it is, it's got some really cool stuff going on. But basically, the, yeah, I think that covers the order giving. Now, there's not an awful lot to say about the camera. I did really appreciate that it doesn't break the format. Like, there's no third-person view of your character. The first thing you see is actually cloners as you know, yeah, coming into the world. And very early, there was something that impressed me more than I probably should have, because, like, basically there were several, you know, clones, and I turned to look at one of them, and he turned to look at me, which, I know, it's such an easy thing to program. It's not difficult, you know. In the case of this, do that, you know, just like, yeah, if the player looks toward this one, you know, and it's not like it happened for the rest of the game. I don't know, it just, I appreciated it. You know, it's a world that feels just reactive enough without, you know, becoming so much so that it distracts from, like, it is very much tactical FPS, gameplay focused. Everything else is really, yeah, tailored to that particular experience. So if that's not your kind of thing, this is not your kind of thing. Oh, this is a decent time to say, this can be your first piece of Star Wars media. Like, there's not so much lore here that, like, I mean, I guess hypothetically, you could argue that it might spoil something or other. You know, if you haven't watched at least through the end of Attack of the Clones, then, you know, through this game you realize, oh, there's a clone army. You know, that's basically, yeah, and, you know, it was made for people who had indeed watched that movie and for whom it was fairly fresh in their memory. That movie came out in 2002, and a lot of people, myself included, watched it a bunch of times in between it and Revenge of the Sith. Now, I should address the... Yeah. Okay, to briefly address the Trandoshan in the room. Yeah, I am not the biggest fan of the prequel movies. I prefer most of the other all of the other prequel media to those movies. You know, whether we're talking like, you know, animated shows or, you know, some of these games and such. Yeah, and yeah, this is not really an exception to that. Honestly, that's kind of a thing here. Like, if you just want like sci-fi FPS tactical, and you know, the Star Wars skin is something you either find appealing or are just indifferent to. Like, if you don't hate Star Wars, but you love that kind of gameplay, yeah, you're gonna have a fun time with this. You know, you don't need... They're not constantly, you know, going over stuff from the movies that is like crucial. It is genuinely just yeah. So I have yet to play Halo. I own at least some Halo games. I do intend to at least play them, and we'll see about video reviews. Not making any promises, but I do hear that the gameplay here is very similar to that. If you want more, you know, analysis of that particular element, you will have to find someone who's actually played both of these, which I don't think is super difficult, you know. I mean, if you find someone who's played this, most of them have probably played Halo. But from what little I know, I think it does make sense. It doesn't seem like a reach. And some have also compared at least one element of it to Metroid. I'm afraid I forget which one, but one Metroid game, and I believe the thing they're referring to is the fact that something can like splatter onto your visor, and then there will be these like windshield wiper, well, one windshield wiper kind of thing getting rid of it, which is also like, it can very briefly obscure your view, but the visor is completely automatic and almost instantaneous, you know. And basically the reason there's sometimes something on your visor, like times it might be just like rain, but if you take out an enemy very, very close to you, something of theirs might spray onto your visor. You know, if it is organic, it will be blood. There will be blood. If it is a droid, I don't know, battery acid, you Claude. And let's see, I think that might just about cover that entire element. Right, yeah, but the so the camera, you know, never breaks the first-person format, not unlike... right now I forget if it's true of all the Fear games. I think the very first Fear had at least one cutscene at the very start that was not that, but other than that, all of them, I think for all the games, are, yeah. Now, that means that when you get a mission briefing, you know, sometimes it's just by audio, but other times the visual is one of the holograms, which I thought was just great. And that is also something we see in some of the movies, you know, soldiers getting orders via hologram. And yeah, I thought it was the exact right way to handle it. I do not think this game would have been at all improved by, you know, cutscenes that were outside of the first-person perspective. Also really appreciate none of the cutscenes are particularly long, because they don't really need to be. It's not really story-heavy. It's mostly just, you know, the story exists to, you know, stitch together levels that and mission stuff and such that they knew would be cool to do. I guess I've more or less covered the controls. They are indeed all the way very, very streamlined. You know, there's multiple grenades, but there is a specific button that enables you to cycle through them, and there's only 4 total, so you're never going to be spending forever cycling through them. There's just one button for melee, and you can activate that at any time you want, and it is, you know, instantaneous. It's not super effective, so do not rely too much on it, but it can be fun taking out some of the... So let's see, I think they are technically battle droids, though they're not the kind that there's a ton of in Phantom Menace, but yeah, also really appreciated, sometimes when they're taken out, they will kind of, if you knock their head off, they will act like a chicken with its head off. And sometimes they will kind of go haywire and just shoot randomly in various directions, but you can tell, okay, that enemy has been defeated, I can move on to the next one. It can be very funny. It looks like a very minimalist fireworks display if you get several of them doing it in a, in a row. Anyway, I think that does pretty much... Yeah, I guess there's a decent time to... So I mentioned, multiple grenades. One of them is, of course, a thermal detonator. And maybe I use this joke too much, but... yeah, let me know in the comments. As per usual, depending on the piece of Star Wars media, the thermal detonator is, the exact destructive power of it varies greatly, which I do think that's something that worked very well, because technically all you know from watching Return of the Jedi is that, it's powerful enough that Jabba feels that it's a threat worth taking seriously. So, it's not like a sparkler. But, yeah, if in some of the, let's see, I think, is it maybe the Dark Forces games where it's essentially like small hand grenade kind of thing. In the Phantom Menace, it is a tiny little nuke. And here it is basically, it's closer to the Dark Forces, maybe, I'd say at least a little bit bigger. It's very good for crowd control or more powerful, more armored enemies. Other than that, I don't think I'm going to explain all of them, but there is also one that is basically like EMP. And I don't think I have to tell you how useful that can be when you're fighting, in this it's not quite armies, but like groups of droids, some of which are very powerful. Do note, it affects you as well, which makes a lot of sense. Like, for one thing, it has that effect in real life. I'm not speaking from experience. And, electricity near a person. I don't actually know if EMP affects human beings, whatever. But there are also like electronic, I already mentioned you're carrying around like a defib, so that's, yeah. And also that one never runs out. It's not like Left 4 Dead or something. And it is a game where you won't always be sure what weapon makes the most sense, such as, when are you getting more ammo for this one? Some have described some of the enemies as bullet sponges. I appreciate where they're coming from. See, I would say that enemies, it tends to be that, and to be clear, I'm not saying that no one else understands this or something. I just think it's worth noting, because I gotta say, when I read someone describe an enemy as a bullet sponge in a video game, I'm thinking, ugh, it's gonna take forever and all my ammo to get through, not necessarily just one, but if there's enough of them, it'll take up all my ammo, and that's really annoying. And yeah, I've quit games for less, but this one, keep in mind, you have 3 soldiers with you who have infinite ammo, and, under the right circumstances, access to very powerful weapons. So, yeah, bullet sponge, so that there's something for you all to do. If there was no bullet sponging going on here, I don't think the engine could support as many enemies as it would take for you all to have something to do all the time. And also note, it's far from all enemies. It's just the ones where, like, honestly, it kind of makes sense, like super battle droids, destroyer droids, some others. And I think that might just about get us to... So, enemy design. I will admit, overall there could have been, and this is of course where it shows, like, in a lot of ways, the licensing, I know, I need to stop starting sentences. I just did it again. Twice. That might be a new record. The licensing. is at times strong with this one, but it's really mostly in, sometimes the variety is, the gameplay I did not feel was at all hampered by the licensing, which, like, what a relief, because, like, this was still, I haven't played that many recent licensed games, so maybe this was around the time they started getting better, but, I mean, I already mentioned Phantom Menace. In addition, you have something like Enter the Matrix, which, I mean, I've seen people describe it as broken, and yeah, parts of it kinda are. I'm not sure I'll ever play it again, but that's mostly because I don't really replay games anymore. But the parts where the AI is driving for you, some of those are rough. And honestly, part of the reason why, like, I would rarely play those on higher than easy difficulty setting, and that game might actually be part of why I tend to play games on easy. Anyway, some people like over easy. I don't know how you like your eggs. Anyway, I think that does pretty much cover. So let's see. The thing I was trying to get to there was, yeah, one area where you definitely see it, because the gameplay is refined. It's also just like, it could be very straightforward. I've hopefully given a good idea by now in this video of if it is, yeah, if you will think that there is enough variety to be had there. But as far as enemies go, you will fight a lot of the same ones. I appreciate that at least they don't particularly do, like, just reskin and then, like, I don't know, that could get a little old, but that's also perhaps more, like, I don't know, maybe that's the fact that I play a bunch of, emulated games showing. Some of those will do reskins a lot, and I appreciate that was necessary because of the technology. But there is not necessarily a huge number of different enemies, and then some of them, there's a little bit of variety in that they might have different guns. That is an area where this sort of thing can usually get, a okay variety, even if they appear the same and more or less move the same. Put different weapons in their hands, and yeah. And, like, I would say over the course of the game, both the enemies and the weapons, by the end, there's a good number overall. It's just not necessarily that you're dealing with that many of them at the same time. Like, I didn't really count, but I wouldn't rule out by the end you will have had access to 10 different weapons, which was the standard around this time. I didn't always, but I appreciate now, today, first-person shooters are not necessarily judged by that level of, but, back in the day, yeah, there would be 10, and that would mean there was one for each number key on the keyboard, Now, I guess the decent time to briefly note, so basically, weaponry. You run around with a pistol, which is dependable, has infinite ammo, low fire rate, low damage. You don't really want to rely on it unless you are just, like, taking out several of these, basic battle droids. But it has decent range and accuracy, and can be used for, whittling away or finishing off. Other than that, you have the rifle that you see them run around with in the prequel movies. 300 rounds, and yeah, you can eat through those very quickly if you insist on using that and nothing else against, some of the more armored enemies. Other than that, there is Sniper with 20 rounds, and as mentioned, you don't always know when you're going to get more ammo for it, so just keep that in mind. And then you have this grenade, rocket launcher, I guess it is. Yeah. With 4 rounds. And once again, you can't be sure exactly when you're going to get more ammo, so just think hard about which you use when, I am not sure commandos have access to the rocket launcher. Actually, come to think of it, I'm not entirely sure if that one is one of the regular ones, but as far as I understand, the sniper is basically just another formation of the regular assault rifle. Not unlike, what was that game called? They used the same engine as Half-Life 1? Gunman? I only ever played the demo, but yeah, that sort of thing. If nobody else remembers that game, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, yeah, other than that, I got a shotgun. I quite appreciate this is one of those games where, you can actually use that effectively. I've played a bunch of shooters where, there's just not that many situations where you can actually get away with using the shotgun. So that's, it's like, why is it here then? And, let's see, yeah, other than that, there are submachine guns, actual machine guns. There's at least one more rocket launcher, and they do have at least one weapon that is also just ridiculously powerful, but doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of ammo. And it is, of course, this was back when, I don't know if this is still true today, but this was back when, the fact that you're dealing with a powerful weapon doesn't mean that it's going to be super useful against everyone. I feel like, wasn't there a time in very early FPS where if you were using a really powerful weapon, it would be great against any enemy? It's just that there were so many enemies that you didn't want to waste it. But, this is one where you can go through all the ammo of one weapon if you're, on just one enemy, if it's an enemy that is genuinely not, if you're using the wrong weapon. I think that might bring us to the, let's see. That covers the weapons, yes, and the enemies. So I think I've covered the droids. There are other enemies. I don't know if I want to give too much away. I'll just say they do indeed fit within Star Wars. And in addition to the... Oh, did I mention destroyer droids or droidekas? And I really appreciate that they do indeed, like we also saw in Phantom Menace, yeah, if they don't get their shield up, they are vulnerable. If they're just rolling, if you're able to fire enough rounds at one while it is rolling, which is one of the places where it's very useful to order your troops to focus fire on. Yeah, you can take it out almost instantly. Anyway, I think that might cover... Right, one more thing for enemies. I probably don't have to tell you, but just to make clear, yeah, this is, of course, one of the ones where, you go up against tank types. I already mentioned some of them, but there are also, just foot soldiers, like the battle droids, and some that are very fast, and not necessarily, armored, but the fact that they're fast means that it's a little harder for you to aim or direct fire, and some fly. And yeah, you do get to fight some of the larger, like the spider tanks. And that's very, very cool. I know I've said it before, but it bears repeating. My main experience with, these days at least, when I watch Revenge of the Sith, I just want to play one of the video games because, like, oh, those are, cool, I want to play as or against that, droid, alien, soldier, or whatever, and using some of those weapons or ships or that sort of thing. This does not have any vehicle stuff that you can control. You do sometimes start a mission by being, airlifted in by one of those, flying things that you see at the end of Attack of the Clones. And then you, engage in mountain flossing to get there, which, if we're being honest, that's repelling. No, I'm not ever going to tire of that joke. Credit to MST3K for it. Now, I think that pretty much, that gets us to the AI. So, different people say that this has, you know, terrible AI, like a scrambled droid mind or something. Others say it has amazing. I think it's kind of depends on the situation, because, like, I think what some are describing as terrible AI, I think there's a couple of things there. I already mentioned that your commandos will follow orders to a fault. Like, if you tell them to do something that will get them killed, that is what is going to happen. You know, they're not gonna, like, when there's one left, he's still gonna be engaging in the order you gave him if you don't give him another order. Or, you know, maybe he's, like, trying to heal defib one of the others. That in and of itself, I would not call bad AI. You know, that's game design. However, there are times where enemies, and occasionally your commandos, will get stuck and just not really do anything. And with the commandos, I'm primarily this was why that guy called me a sadist for not getting to Bacta when he wasn't moving. He was glitching in place, and it's possible there are other fixes, but I was very relieved to find that I was able to move on to the next checkpoint, next level, I mean. And at that point, he spawned in the new level, and he was moving fine again. And I think it happened, I don't know, I feel like I could probably, the number of times that it happened could probably be counted on, like, one hand. Possibly even one of the alien ones that don't have 5 fingers. The enemies, for those, it also did not happen a huge amount of the time, but it was slightly immersion breaking. You know, there are times where they will just not really move, even, you know, no matter what you do. And yeah, I think that does pretty much. But yeah, you know, other than that, yeah, like, enemies will try to use tactics against you, and obviously part of the reason that they're able to in a licensed game is that it is not as open as, you know, I'll get to that briefly. So, you know, basically, you know, it is more or less pre-programmed, and it's, yeah, you know, but it is there. It's not a shooting gallery. It is, like, genuinely, you have to really be tactical. Yeah, I'll talk about that as the... Right, so very briefly... No, yeah, this is a good time to talk about. So it is very linear. It is, like... I think some might describe it as a series of hallways, which I wouldn't say is completely fair. I think that might be... I feel like I saw at least one person say that, or am I thinking of a different game? Maybe. I don't know. At the very start, I will say it was, you know, there was not the greatest variety, but that was, I think, primarily the tutorial, and it is necessary for them to keep your attention focused until you've learned everything. After that, there is a good level of variation to, you know, some areas are tight, even cramped, not to the point where it's, like, unfun to play, but, you know, enough that it's a different kind of challenge. Some areas are a bit bigger and very open, and, you know, that means there's a greater, you know, you have more tactical, you know, yeah, there are more things you can do, and I think that is more or less, yeah, the atmosphere. I thought this did a great job of the aesthetics of the prequels, but this more kind of gritty, like effectively so, atmosphere. I'm willing to acknowledge that at times George is trying for that, and certainly there is a decent degree of success in the big battles at the very end of Attack of the Clones. But I don't know. I at times I just don't think I'm not always the biggest fan of the tone he went for a bunch of the time. And I do think a lot of these concepts can work. You just need them to be a little less goofy and cartoony, which, I mean, I think he was worried that, he said that he's on the record. He makes the movies for 12-year-olds, or used to anyway. And did that sound dismissive? I did not mean it to. I do absolutely love episodes 4 and 5. And I respect the other 4 that he wrote and or directed. Anyway, yeah, I think he was worried that the 12-year-olds would be upset if there was too much gritty stuff in the movie. And, it's like, well, a video game, they can stop playing, if they just can't quite. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's made for 12 years. Well, I don't know, maybe just barely 12-year-olds. But, 12-year-olds who want to run around and shoot things. This does not have, droid sidekicks and such, which I don't mean as, like, an insult. I'm quite fond of a significant percentage of those. But, yeah, this is more for, like, people who want that. There were other Star Wars games at least close to when this came out, if that was not the kind of gameplay that you wanted. I remember around the time of the Phantom Menace, they made, like, a Lemmings clone. Like, it was isometric, so not exactly like, but, basically, yeah, you're telling pit droids where to go and trying to avoid them, accidentally smashing against something. I only ever played the demo, but had fun. I think that does bring us to... Yeah, I guess it's worth noting, I mean, cutscenes, a lot of the time it is just, you being told some kind of status update, but they're so short and they're not, so frequent considering the length, which I'm not going to talk about the length here. Basically, it is just, you can find it on How Long to Beat. That is a website that exists. You're on the internet right now watching this. So I personally thought it was a good length, especially considering, not particularly plot heavy. It just has stuff that is like, I mean, it starts during the climax of Attack of the Clones. You are on Geonosis, and it ends with a lead-in to Revenge of the Sith, which, yeah, that was a selling point. You get a sneak peek at Revenge of the Sith, and I will say, like, if I would have been extremely excited, even more excited than I was back then. Yeah, I used to be fond of the prequels. In my defense, I was a teenager. But I still love, yeah, I already mentioned, I still love, 4, 5, and 8. Yeah, I know. A lot of people hate 8. Anyway, I think that does cover the, But yeah, I would have been even more excited to watch Episode 3 if I had played this back when it first came out. Now, yeah, and I would not really say any part of it is a grind. There were times where I thought it might end up like that, but ultimately, it was just about me getting the hang of something. The audio is, of course, great. Like, that's what, yeah, audio and music tend to be really, really solid for the Star Wars games. Some of them struggle a little with graphics, especially the ones, like, part of the reason Phantom Menace, the game, is a mess in ways that are different from the movie is that it was rushed out to, yeah, it was supposed to come out the same time as the movie, and I think it did, and that's, yeah, but, yeah, audio and music, I mean, part of it is that it's, some of the music in these licensed Star Wars games is just lifted from movies or other games, because the theme is, applicable to different characters. And yeah, the music, they do a great job of, like, there is very much a military tone here, because, you know, you are very much seeing the world through their eyes, the clone. And there, something I quite appreciate here is, I've said before, I think with the prequels, we got a little bit too much lightsaber, and it feels so weird to say. That's, I mean, honestly, part of why I used to love them when I was a teenager. One of my favorite things about Star Wars was the lightsabers. And, you know, I think Disney Star Wars has largely done a good job of either not having so much that it feels excessive, or distracting from it potentially being excessive by varying up things. Like, I think the Acolyte, you know, there's a lot of lightsaber stuff there, but because of this kind of wuxia, you know, thing going on, yeah, I think it works. But in this game, you are not wielding a lightsaber. That's not a spoiler. That's just, I mean, I hope you're not shocked. There is at least one lightsaber to be found, and if you do, the one you play as will say, civilized weapon, an elegant weapon from our civilized age. Well, times change, or something along those lines, which I thought was delightful, even as much as I still love lightsabers. Now, yeah, but audio, you know, everything sounds exactly right. And once again, like, some of the ways a gimme, because a bunch of these things you've seen in the movies. And so we know what a destroyer droid, a super battle droid, a regular battle droid, well, close to regular as we have here, sound like. The guns, all these kinds of things, you know. But yeah, there is this degree of, like, authenticity, I guess, even though it's a fictional world. But yeah, it feels like that's always been a major strength of the Star Wars, you know, everything. I haven't really read the books, the comics, but, you know, if you watch the movies, the shows, you play the games, there is this feeling that this is all set in the same world, more or less. I know some of it is not canon, but yeah. And yeah, the graphics are pretty good. Like, for 2005, there's not really anything major, like, wrong with them. And it is great seeing, you know, moving through, 3D render. That's also what they are when they're animated. Anyway, yeah, these various things that you see in the movies, and seeing them actually respond to you is very cool, whether they're taking your orders or your fire. The game, I guess I've already more or less made clear, is challenging. What I'll briefly note is, I am not the founder of the fan club of difficulty spikes. I can appreciate that there's sometimes cool stuff to them. You have to do it exactly right. If I am to like a difficulty spike, rather than either tolerate it or stop playing the game. This one handles them remarkably well. So I'd say the first one I encountered definitely did have me frustrated. I felt like I was in the pit with a Rancor or something. I was like, I don't know what to do. And I kept playing, kept trying different things, and by the end I was indeed able to clear it. And I was like, you know what, this was the right choice, because that was so cool. Like, yeah, just absolutely incredible. Deeply satisfying. And I also really appreciated they made sure to make clear. Also, note there's a checkpoint save, I believe, right before or very close to the start of it. And as soon as you reach that point, it tells you in... I don't know if I want to give away exactly how much time. I'll just say that, at first it might sound like enough, then you'll feel like it might be too little, and by the end you'll realize, oh, it was just barely enough. And yeah, it tells you how much time is left, and then gives you updates again, later, over the course of the time limit, and can confirm if you don't make it in the time limit, you do lose and have to play that part over again. And there are other difficulty spikes. I'm not sure I would say any of them are quite as tough as that first one. And none of them are like... There was never a time where I just stopped playing the game because of it. Like, I think on that first one, well, I mean, right now I play for about 10 minutes per sitting. And the first time I played for 10 minutes, in the hours before I could play it again, because of my wrist pain, I wasn't even considering no longer playing the game. What I was thinking was, how do I beat it, though? And I think they did a good job of, like, ultimately, there will be times where you are just making incremental progress and then have to maybe start over, or hypothetically could save scum or something. But by the time I had completed it, I did feel like, okay, you know what, it's not like, I mean, is it unfair? I would say it's definitely frustrating until you get the hang of it. But once you do, it was definitely one where I felt like I was gradually improving to the point where eventually I felt more, I mean, I'm not sure I would say that I ever felt like, okay, I can, I'm just like swimming through it now. But the, it went from tough as Beskar to eventually just, I don't know, doable. Not sure it ever became a Mailaroon route for me, but, it's not really supposed to be. This was a time when FPSs were challenging. That I've played enough FPSs that came out after this to know some of them, they're not supposed to be the most challenging. And I'm glad that those exist. I mean, personally, I prefer the ones that do a decent job of challenging you. But yeah, it's very fun and rewarding to play. And I guess that does pretty much cover. Let's just let me think. Yeah, there's definitely at least one more thing that I want to make sure to say. Yeah, because the game's age, at least on Steam, no achievements, which it doesn't really need them. It doesn't really have like collectibles or anything like that. Replayability, I would say, is pretty much just, you can try the different difficulty settings. Maybe you can set yourself some challenges if you really want to play it again, but you're like, I need something different. I don't know, maybe you could say, well, I bet that part would be super difficult to complete if I don't give orders and or I only use the pistol, that sort of thing. And, right, I guess I haven't really come around and said it, but I do appreciate that they managed to give you pretty much all the core weapons that we expected around this time from an FPS. That was also something I thought worked well in the Kyle Katarn games. Right, and do note, because the whole tactical thing, you can, let's see, I think you can pick up and carry 2 additional weapons, but one of them has to be the rocket launcher. And again, I don't know, maybe the rocket launcher is one of your own already, in which case you can only pick up 1 weapon. But yeah, do you want a shotgun or a machine gun? There were times where I actually found myself thinking, well, I mean, I'm actually not entirely sure, because like at the end of the day, yeah, if the enemies get really close, and some of them do, a shotgun is technically, it has the stopping power, like if you're being surrounded and overwhelmed, a machine gun's not necessarily gonna be the thing to, yeah. And I've mentioned the various glitches already. I do want to underline, I never experienced a corrupted save. The game never crashed or froze. And it did run, like, I mean, let's see, when the first time I ran it, it asked if I wanted to enable or disable a certain thing, and I wasn't entirely sure. So the first time I tried enabling it, the second time I tried disabling it, both times it ran fine. It ran right out of the box, no problems today, so there really isn't any, yeah, right, as usual, I got this on sale. I would probably say you should as well, but, let's see, yeah, I thought they did a decent job of making the settings interesting and having just enough of them for the length, because, like, there's not a huge number of different core settings. There's just different areas of the settings that you visit, and it's one of those things, I used to love all the Kyle Katarn games, so maybe Mysteries of the Sith. By now, I'm at a point where, like, if I was gonna replay them again for the dozenth time, that's probably bad grammar, isn't it? Good. I would probably only replay Jedi Outcast, One of the things that always bugged me about Mysteries of the Sith, and eventually started to get to me more about Jedi Academy, more so than the fan service of Jedi Academy, that was my initial thing of like, this is getting a bit much, was the fact that you go to so many different places that you don't really have a chance to connect to any one of them. Other than, I mean, in Jedi Academy, there are levels, individual levels that go on for long enough. I will acknowledge, Mysteries of the Sith, you certainly do sometimes spend a lot of time in one setting, but part of that is that levels in that game are sometimes huge and labyrinthian, and that's not necessarily good either. And once again, some of that is true of Dark Forces 2 as well, Jedi Knight 1, but I don't know, in that one, I think it's the fact that in that one you can clearly follow a red thread. Like, I acknowledge there's some weird stuff. I've never really understood why it is that, it's such a short distance between a place full of these dangerous bird-like aliens and, like, the home of Morgan Katan, this old man. But the, yeah. I got a sense of each overall setting in this game to an extent where it really felt like, okay, this is a place, Like, the amount of time you end up spending on Geonosia, for example, it's like, okay, you know what, fair enough. Like, this, I mean, the movie does an okay job of making it feel real, as much as the prequels do that for any new location. But yeah, in this game, it really felt like, okay, this is actually, like, I am in a military installation that operated fine before the clones descended, I think I've decided not to give away too much. I will just say a lot of people will be very excited about, or were, I have to keep reminding myself, the game's over 20 years old by now, about the last setting of this game. And I definitely also wanted to mention one of the settings here. I'm not going to give away exactly when you get to it or anything, but, basically you're sent to a place and you're essentially investigating, but it turns out to essentially be a kind of ghost ship. And now, I was not expecting System Shock 2. I try not to be that unfair. Very few games measure up to my all-time favorites of System Shock 2, Deus Ex 1, and Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones, in no particular order. So I wasn't disappointed, but yeah, it was cool. I don't know if it was the very best for this kind of game, but I don't know, it grew on me, not unlike a tumor, that creepy uppy kind of love. But yeah, what I will definitely say is the sound design and the establishing and maintaining of atmosphere was very effective, because at least at the very start of that, you are alone, and you're not really encountering enemies directly. You're just kind of aware that, I mean, this entire place cannot possibly be entirely empty. I will say I do think that the game, see, it's very difficult because like it's not like they could have actually had you play like something from every, not with the length that this game is, and I don't think the gameplay is quite enough that you could like, I mean, would anyone want to play this if it was like 40 hours? I don't know. But yeah, considering that the Clone Wars last like what, 10 years, I think, isn't that how long is between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith? I think it's something like that. Obviously they're not gonna have, take you through the entire thing like real time or something, but I do think that, because at least once a mission will start by you being told, okay, so now it's been a while since the last mission, and the way that the war is going has changed tremendously, and that did feel a tiny bit like, okay, so we are maybe rushing a little bit, and it was maybe also because by then I was very comfortable in the spot in the war that it was. I think what I'm saying is I would have maybe liked to see a little bit of the interim there, but I appreciate that for this kind of game it would maybe not work as well. I think that's as much as I can say without spoiling. And the level design is great. Yeah, I've already mentioned that some parts are tight. Perhaps, in fact, some of the ghost ship. Other parts are more open. Like, I was impressed by how big and open some areas were. And this is also one of those games where, I mean, I think they're doing that thing of just hiding, because like every so often you'll pass through a door. I think they hide loading times in those, because some of these levels, from the start to the very end, very long without an area that just says loading, please wait. And yeah, they do a really great job making it feel organic. Like, it feels like this is a place where people actually lived and or worked. And also this thing of having the variety between, like, I never felt like, okay, I'm just spending too long either in open areas or in really tight quarters. Now, yeah, and there's solid environmental storytelling. You'll pass areas and it's like, okay, there was definitely a battle here, or, this place must have been used for this, that, and the other thing, that sort of thing. And yeah, it is essentially a series of just, what's that word? Yeah, just a bunch of individual tactical scenarios that you have to effectively maneuver, and yeah, personally it was enough for me. And I mean, I felt like, I mean, I knew it from just, I wasn't expecting anything else, and I thought there was enough variety to them that yeah, it was, I never felt myself like just, I don't know, looking at the dunes near Luke's home and being like, well, everything's the same. Am I going to Tatooine with my references a little too much here? I don't know. Maybe I am, George Lucas. I think that pretty much does cover, yeah, I don't know. Hopefully I have helped you decide whether or not you want to get and play this one. And yeah, I rate this 8 very skilled commandos, carrying out your orders, which means you have a certain amount of responsibility on your shoulders there, out of 10.